And I think so much of management and leadership is really about doing the right things consistently every day. And it is process and science more than art. And you can really build the right rituals that build great organizations, especially management. I think leadership is a lot about inspiration. Management is a lot more about execution, and people use the two words interchangeably, but they're very different in what they mean.
I'm Amy Woodall, and this is The Conscious Habit, a show from the People Forward Network. We're teaching you how to incorporate love and consciousness at work, at home, and the world at large.
JJ is a tech entrepreneur, CEO, coach, and angel investor with a deep focus on the impact of AI on the future of work and productivity. He is the CEO and founder of OnLoop, an applied AI company dedicated to making every manager a great manager. A Singaporean native and a World Economic Forum tech pioneer, JJ holds an MBA from Stanford and has held leadership roles at Uber and Accenture Strategy. In this conversation, we discuss trends in AI and how to leverage AI to be a better leader of people. We talk about the power of feedback and how building performance is all about observations first and then a willingness to have a conversation. And who knew that AI could support us this way with neutrality and empathy? We think you're going to love this episode. Now take a listen. So JJ, we're so excited to have you here on the Conscious Habit podcast. Wanted to start off just right out of the gate and ask, how do you go from being an exec at Uber, having this huge frustration, and then founding the business OnLoop? Tell us about that journey.
Thank you, Des, and Amy, for having me. I call myself an accidental entrepreneur. I did not grow up in an entrepreneurial household. I went to good schools, did well in those schools, worked in large branded companies. But, somewhere along the way, around my mid-20s, felt like I was not meant for the corporate ladder. And I wanted to solve problems that I was passionate about. And, Uber was a very special and unique place as a company. It's probably an entire podcast about Uber and Uber culture and the goods and bads of it. But it was a place that was really filled with people who were entrepreneurial. And I had a lot of peers sort of leave Uber and start companies and have venture capitalists line up to fund those businesses. And I think the combination of going to Stanford for my MBA and then spending close to 4 years at Uber gave me the audacity to go start a company. And I'm a pretty old school entrepreneur where if I'm not excited by it, I just don't think it's worth the pain of going through it every day. And soon after I left Uber, I wrote a 2-page document that I called Talent Tech, and Talent Tech opposed to HR Tech, as to all of the issues I saw as both an individual contributor and a manager of 5 to 100-person teams during my time at Uber, and honed in on the bane of performance reviews and performance management as the place to start to sort of rethink feedback. But then that morphed into a much sort of larger endeavor to really think about how do we make every manager good at their job, and sort of demystify the job of a manager, which is sort of what we do with the OnLoop product today. And we can go into that if that's interesting.
I would love to, if you can just give an overview of how you demystify management through your AI tool.
Yeah, so what we took a lot of inspiration from was the fitness industry. And the fact that being healthy about 10 years ago was this big black box. And if someone was unhealthy, they didn't know where to start. And it started with 10,000 steps on the Fitbit and then moved on to the 3 rings on the Apple Watch. And then products like the Oura Ring and the Whoop Band. And what they do is they break down health into diet, sleep, and exercise. And then they sort of track what goes on every day to then build micro habits around one of those 3. And as we think about sort of each employee, we think there are 5 hierarchical layers to that person's productivity. At the base of it is that person's energy or motivation, what we say, how full your battery is, right? And the reality is that you can run on a low battery for a while, but if you don't charge it, that battery is going to die. And managers need to understand where every team member's battery is, and that fluctuates from day to day, week on week, based on what's going on. The next layer is clarity on people's goals. A lot of people think OKRs equal goals, but it couldn't be more different. OKRs are a way of thinking about goals. And actually, OKRs are good at helping companies set goals, but they're terrible at helping individuals set goals. And so we think about goals as targets, projects, and skills, because those are the building blocks of what each person is doing every day. And a manager ensuring that each team member has ultimate clarity on what targets, projects, and skills they're working on, and what the relative prioritization is. And we call those two layers the base performance layers. So i.e., we believe that if you have a low performer on your team, something is broken at those two layers. And actually, you don't even have to think about feedback and other things that managers care about. Those are higher up the hierarchy. So after those two layers, we have the two layers of feedback. So one, celebrate feedback to help people understand their superpowers, and then improve feedback to help people understand blind spots. And what we explain to managers is that improved feedback only starts playing a role if someone is motivated, has clarity on their goals, and understands their superpowers. And then once people understand their blind spots, the last and final layer is continuous growth and development. And so things like constructive feedback and continuous growth are actually what high performers need more. And then clarity on energy and goals is what sort of lower and mediocre performers need more. And managers do the exact opposite. So if they have a high performer, they'll give them no improved feedback because they're like, oh, you're doing a great job. Like, keep doing what you're doing. And if they're a poor performer, they'll like dig in and give them critical feedback where that only makes the situation worse. But what they really need to understand is take a step back, understand what's going on, and sort of clarify. And frankly, we started out trying to fix feedback. And so we started the middle of that pyramid, but through our work with a couple of Stanford professors, through our work with a bunch of managers, we realized that there is this invisible hierarchy of needs that exist. And that's how sort of we gave birth to the collaborative team development framework, which we then now teach managers and then sort of implement the OnLoop platform to make those 5 layers easy to build habits around.
Yeah. I was going to say the AI component, what is it that you are seeing or, recognizing within organizations where you're like, we need an automation piece of it, because leaving it to humans alone, maybe we don't see the same adaptation, or maybe we're not seeing, they're not measuring things as consistently. What was it that you all were measuring in your studies that said, we've got to add this AI backing to help support these changes?
Yeah, so we started working with GPT-3 back in early 2021. So for context, ChatGPT is GPT 3.5 that came out in late 2022. So this was about a year and 10 months before sort of everything in the world became Gen AI. And we were focused on a very simple use case, which was writing performance reviews, which is something that every manager universally hates, right? And a number of managers have said, I love all aspects of my job except writing reviews. And our little pipe dream was, what if we could take these micro pieces of feedback that we were collecting in our product, what we call captures, and then stitch them together using Gen AI into cohesive narratives. And we, even with the tech back in 2021, we were blown away by what it was able to do. And we were the first company in the world to announce automated performance reviews using AI back in 2021. However, we realized that performance reviews is twice a year problem. There's a much more everyday problem on how do managers provide everyday clarity for their team members. And what managers have, or what humans have, are observations and conversations, which are largely unstructured. And what goals and feedback are very structured conversion of those observations based on what the context is, right? So I'm sure you guys are familiar with the situation behavior impact model of good feedback, right? And a lot of human beings are taught that framework. When they're in the classroom, they understand it, right? But in the heat of the moment, it goes out of the window, right? So what if you could take people's unstructured observations, raw with emotion, and then parse that out into specific pieces of celebrate feedback or improve feedback, rewrite it following a situation behavior impact framework and ensuring that it's worded in a direct and kind manner, and then extract the skills and behaviors and competencies that are embedded in that observation. And then we can sort of divvy up the job into what humans are good at, which is having conversations and making observations, and then using technology to structure, rewrite, and use it in a way that compounds over time to give you rich insight. And when we first built the product without AI in it, humans were typing out these captures. They were trying to sort of write this feedback in the right way, and then picking up tags as to what behaviors they saw were relevant in that piece of feedback. But as applied AI got richer and we could use it in more parts of the product, we could then keep taking away the friction out of it, because ultimately to form habit, you have to reduce friction and give people significant reward for doing that task, right? And so everybody wants feedback to be a habit in an organization, but every organization really struggles with it because it's a tough habit and a tough muscle to build. And so we were like, what if we could keep chipping away at taking the friction away and sort of fundamentally changing sort of the effort reward ratio?
I love that. I think, working with a lot of levels of leadership, whether it's, a new manager up to even the C-suite, I think two of the biggest challenges are, how do I start the conversation, and then how do I wrap it up? Whether it's a coaching conversation or feedback, performance, whatever it is. One thing I'm really curious about, JJ, is it sounds to me like there's a presumption that manager has to be pretty self-aware to capture what needs to go into, the observation in order to shape the conversation.
So yes and no, right? So that is where the hierarchy of needs plays a role. So obviously one of the things that at this point people know is that they should be having one-on-ones, right? And it's pretty common manager one-on-one that have regular one-on-ones, but it is crazy to me how many managers don't know where to start with their one-on-ones. And often it goes into sort of tactical task mode versus getting a holistic sense of what's going on with the person. And actually, I was on with a friend today who spent some time with us. He now runs KPMG's campus recruiting in Singapore. And he's like, listen, because I spent time at OnLoop, I started me one-on-one with how full is your battery on a 0% to 100%. And checking in with someone to understand what their mental state is and where they are is a fantastic way to set context to any conversation, right? And genuinely asking someone, how are you, right? Versus it being a pleasantry of how are you, I'm good, thank you, and then you move on. And then sort of the 5 sort of layers in the hierarchy help sort of people work through those 5 layers and think through sort of how to holistically see it through. And that's how we sort of help folks structure conversations. Now, to your point around self-awareness around the observation can be as unstructured as we want, and we can use the framework to then see what pieces we can pick up from a structure perspective. So one of the pieces we're working on is a conversational AI bot within WhatsApp that can take both raw voice notes or text notes around, you've been working with Amy for the last week. What are your thoughts? Right? And you can provide a stream of consciousness around sort of what that working relationship has been like. And then we will structure that out by those 5 layers and then tell you where we're able to pick up certain observations or not, and say, actually, these are all the 5 layers you should be thinking about Amy's work. We did not get a sense of where her energy level and motivation is, so maybe that's something to inquire on. If we've been able to infer that from this unstructured observations, we sort of provide that as a hypothesis. So what you're then able to do is you can take any level of self-awareness, any level of structured understanding of management, and then help the person understand all of the pieces of it. And the starting point can be not great, or the starting point can be fantastic. And where the incremental value gets added depends on where each person's starting point is, and which is why our tagline says, make every manager a great manager, because we truly believe every manager can be a great manager, but they just haven't had the exposure of converting sort of what they have as raw thoughts into structured way of running a team.
I think for many people who are in management, right? A lot of times they get there because they're like, oh, you were good at doing the thing. And so now we're going to put you in charge of the people doing the thing. And it doesn't always shift the mindset, right? They still might be in the doer mindset, not necessarily in the beer mindset. And so I love what you all have come up with of saying, like, you can still be good at the thing. We're going to help you be good at the people piece. I'm curious what you have either noticed or how the AI may help bypass this, because as humans, we have our own judgments. So if you and I are working together, JJ, and there's just something about how you operate that I don't like, that's likely going to come through in the feedback that I'm going to kind of post through. And so where does AI help take out some of the automatic judgment or even some of our own bias in how that feedback is then being shared with that other person for their own growth, getting rid of my own, personal head trash that may be wrapped in?
Totally. So all feedback that is good is direct and kind. There is no version of good feedback that is either not direct or not kind. And so essentially, if someone says, Amy shows up late all the time and is a complete embarrassment, that delivered to Amy is never good feedback. And what AI is incredible at doing is universally applying empathy and converting any observation in whatever form to a standard level of direct kindness. And we then give that back to you, right? So we give that to the observer. We're not sending it to the other person. You can then decide what to do with it, right? So you can either save it for yourself, or you can then use it to train yourself. Oh, this is what good feedback actually sounds like, right? Or you can sort of have a one-on-one conversation and share the person through the app. So the issue I have is that teaching people how to do feedback has not worked. We have tried this for decades. It has failed. In the same way that, when I was a child, I memorized phone numbers. We don't memorize phone numbers anymore, even address book. Now, I still know my wife's phone number because of an emergency I want to call her, but the bulk majority of my friends' phone numbers is an address book. We think about observations and feedback the same way. We should focus humans on observations, and then we use technology to convert that to feedback, which is a very specific art form of how to communicate a certain observation in the surface of improvement of the other person. So I tell people, if feedback doesn't inspire the other person to change, it's useless. I don't care how frustrated you are or what your emotions are, but if it doesn't inspire improvement, you have failed at it. And I don't think humans are wired to do that. And actually, AI is much more empathetic about how it communicates things because it doesn't have its own feelings to deal with. And how humans communicate things to someone else, more often than not, is got to do with what's going on in it for them than what is going on for the other person, which is why I'm massively bullish about AI relationship partners and AI therapists that can provide cure for loneliness in this world in a way that hasn't existed before. Because yeah, sure, I think human companionship done well will always be better, but AI can fill the gap in a very, very powerful way. And AI is actually a lot less biased, to your point, Amy, than a lot of humans are. And now what we're starting to do in companies is, rather than have managers rate individuals on certain behavioral competencies, you can take all of those observations and then uniformly rate people through semantic analysis of converting those observations to a particular understanding of a person and then matching it to definitions of what a level 5 executive presence looks like, what's a level 6 extrovert looks like. Whereas in the past, when managers have done it, is essentially loudest voice wins and who fights for their team the most. And there's actually very little correlation between good work being done and what gets rewarded.
So much less subjective, isn't it?
Absolutely. And I coined a term called the eloquence bias, that a lot of the issues that we see around both gender disparities in pay, as well as sort of, racial inequalities at work, goes back that the straight, white, extroverted male is significantly better at advocating for themselves and advocating for their team. And if you're not all of those four, you're typically less sort of loud about advocating. And that drives so many injustices in the workplace. And if you just use AI to adjudicate work, then we can reward where work gets done versus what is most visible.
Ladies, imagine taking time away to work on you. Meditation, yoga, transformational work, a chance to have grand adventures and build lasting relationships. Deseri Garcia and I founded High Vibe Tribe Retreats to create just that. And if you're curious about joining us on our next retreat, head over to highvibetriberetreat.com. Link in the show notes.
Amy, is your head just like in terms of how powerfully we can leverage this tool?
I think so, yeah. And I think also like I think both of our heads go here, Des, and I'm so curious to hear JJ's take on this. I love that it's like, how do we take human bias out? Because how many people who, like you said, aren't the, straight white man, no offense to the straight white man listening, we love you just the same. But yeah, how do we take out some of that bias so that there's an even chance to grow and to advocate and be heard and get feedback? And, I think all of that's fantastic. And then I think as humans, our brain automatically goes to, oh no, AI is going to take over the world and I'm no longer going to be valuable and I'm not going to be needed. And what happens from here? So I'm so curious of your take, JJ, on like, what is the balance of saying, hey, don't make AI responsible for this. This should always be a human component versus what we can, rely on AI to help us elevate.
So my view on it is that there should be no boundary. In the same way that when factories were invented, we had this conversation around what factories should do and what automated machines should do and what humans should do. And when the internet came out, the same conversation happened. This is a continuation of that same conversation. I think there are three things that, given the society we live in, humans will always do better. One is form real connection with other humans, right? So if you're in a sales role or you're in a BD or partnerships role, I think we will want to engage with other humans versus AI. Two, we live in a society where we need to ascribe blame to a human when someone goes wrong. So if you're in a decision-making role where you're making judgment, humans will continue to make that judgment. I don't think companies will be run by an AI CEO. I think they'll be run by a human CEO because we need to sort of land blame if stuff goes wrong. And then the third is connecting disparate dots on the fly. So I think a lot of sort of high-end coaching work, so coaching CEOs, and I coach a few CEOs, requires a unstructured random connecting of dots real time. And I think that humans will continue to excel at. Everything else, I think, is up for grabs. And I tell people this, I'm like, if you were in the 1930s or 1940s and you were a factory worker in the US, your job was getting shipped to China, unless you were really good at it. And I think every knowledge worker in the developed world has the risk of their job getting shipped to the Philippines. And that's the reality. And so I think every knowledge worker needs to understand that we now live in a more competitive world. We live in a globalized war for jobs and war for talent, and a combination of applied AI and immersive VR, which is the other tech that hasn't come yet, but when it comes, it's going to create another wave, will completely change what the future of work looks like. And once we can accent neutralize people, I tell people, America, the UK, And American and British colonies have had a bit of an advantage in sort of quote unquote leadership roles because there's been sort of a eloquence advantage. Now, if I can make every Vietnamese person on my team sound American through AI, that massively changes that person's ability to globally operate. And it's almost there where we're months away from driving. We can all do real-time translation, but having people sort of speak in one language and it come out in a different language in that person's voice almost real time is months away. And so 3 of us could be speaking completely different languages and have a really fluent conversation and understand each other perfectly.
It's like that, like we were talking about before, it's evening the playing field. We had Robin Rice on the podcast back earlier this year. I don't know if you're familiar with Robin, but she consults with a lot of AI tech geniuses as an advisor. And we were talking about like the bridge between human consciousness and AI. And AI is about to be like, hey, that knowledge thing, we're all about to have it pretty damn fast, right at our fingertips.
Yeah.
So it's no longer necessarily a competitive advantage. I mean, not to say that there's not exceptions to that, but I do think that wisdom, that's going to be what we all need to lean into, because knowledge is about to be a commodity available to all across socioeconomic, standards. So, Des.
Yeah.
Such a special leveler, especially for developing countries. And yes, I think judgment, and it's appalling for me that we don't teach people decision making. And decision making comes entirely from practice. But with a 5-month-old son, I think a lot about sort of what is the world that I need to get him ready for. And a lot of it is making good judgment calls. That's one. And actually, I think being an athlete will be in fashion again. Because we don't want to watch AI playing soccer. Right? Like, they might be very good at it. Like there's zero interest in watching American robots versus French robots.
Yeah. I'm not going to cry like I wept watching the Olympics.
Right. Exactly. So I think that, cognitive work has been sort of what our generation has sort of built careers on. I think that will completely change again in the next 50 years. And I find that fascinating and exciting because I also come from a privileged position where I understand the tech. I'm globally mobile, right? I don't belong to one place versus the other. And so I understand that I sit in a very privileged place of the globalized elite to be able to navigate this world. But the future of work in AI is the most fascinating space on the planet. And it will continue to rapidly change for the next couple of decades. And I accidentally found myself in it, and I feel very lucky.
I love the accidental entrepreneur. So, JJ, you just teed up like brilliantly. I don't know if you did it intentionally or not, maybe not, but talking about like our cognitive ability. But you said, the 3 things: forming real connection. We need to ascribe blame or judgment on other humans. And that disparate connection, all of that like kind of feeds into the soup of my question, which we ask everyone that comes on the podcast. What is conscious leadership? What does that mean to you?
Yeah, so actually there's an amazing quote that talks about how managers were able to be random in an in-office environment, but hybrid work requires them to be deeply intentional. And there's a book that I want to write called The Intentional Manager, or what it takes to manage in today's sort of AI hybrid workplace. And I'm generally a fairly disorganized person. And what technology is able to do is sort of create habit and structure from lack of structure. And I think so much of management and leadership is really about doing the right things consistently every day. And it is process and science more than art. And you can really build the right rituals that build great organizations, especially management. I think leadership is a lot about inspiration. Management is a lot more about execution, and people use the 2 words interchangeably, but they're very different in what they mean. But I think management is really about habits. and habits that you form yourself, rituals you form with your team, and habits you build in those people to then consistently drive outcomes. And so, we live in a world where James Clear and Atomic Habits made habits cool, which is great. And I think, a lot of people talk about habits. And I have the privilege of being friends with Nir Eyal, who now lives in Singapore, who wrote the book Hooked, and sort of one of the sort of pioneering models of habit formation. And it's not random anymore how habits get formed, and we can really sort of use both technology and training to form the right habits in organizations.
I like that the decision loop is taken out, because you mentioned there is the, yes, we need to learn how to make good decisions, but there's also how do we get rid of decision fatigue? I want to be like Steve Jobs and be like, can I just wear a damn black? By the way, I don't know, is the black t-shirt on purpose for you, JJ? Are you is this your daily wardrobe, or is this just by happenstance?
So I do have colors in my wardrobe, but everything in my wardrobe is company branded. But I do have some variety in what I wear. But this shirt says you weren't born to write performance reviews, which is sort of.
I feel like that would sell like hotcakes at any HR convention that you might ever go to, JJ.
I've actually been stopped on planes and had people take pictures. And so we definitely, when we can afford to, buy a billboard on the 101 with the tagline.
You need the swag. You need some swag on the website of how do we get a little swag. But I think that decision loop, like you were mentioning, making good decisions and, versus having AI and tech, because I'm also in the, I totally understand not being a very structured human by nature, but I know that I thrive and crave structure. I'm just not very damn good at creating it for myself. But I know that like life is better when that is there. And so in that, I'm going to go back because my mind just kind of plays on both sides. That's where my questioning keeps going, is what are the decisions? If I'm a manager right now and I'm listening, what are some of the decisions that you recommend? Hey, if you can get this automated on your day, you're going to be a better manager. And then here's the decisions that your own mind can help you make. Do you have sort of a checklist on either side?
So I believe that 70%, actually there's McKinsey research around this, that 70% of work done by managers is just busy work coordination. That takes up so much time and effort that can just be replaced by conversational AI. And you can have a conversational AI co-pilot that sits within text messages or WhatsApp or Slack or whatever your medium of choice is, that checks in on team members to understand what's going on and asks them the regular questions kind of on its own, where you don't have to remember to ask it. And then when there is a gap, that gets escalated to you. And so today we live in orgs where every manager can only have 4 to 6 direct reports because there's so much busy work around each direct report, right? But think about a world where we can get rid of all the bad managers, replace them with AI managers, and then give good managers spans of control to 15 or 20, where AI does 70-80% of it, and then you're triaging and solving the tougher stuff for a larger group of people. Isn't that a both more efficient and effective workplace versus people dreading who my manager is, will they advocate for me right? It's just the manager roulette that happens in large companies is terrible. And it's terrible for retaining high performers. It's terrible for driving consistent culture. And it's terrible for driving uniform accountability. And your outcome in large companies is so dependent on who your manager is. And that's just wrong. It just shouldn't be the case. And I'm not close to yet fully solving it, but it frustrates me to no end that is the reality we live in today.
I love the idea of how do I have my brain outside of me thinking on my behalf? That's what you're mentioning of how do you have this, basically it's you, a better version of you, a less judgmental, more consistent version of your brain that can answer and communicate on your behalf. Des, what would you do with your time if you had an extra brain just thinking and executing on your behalf?
I'm like blown away. Like I'd, start another business and maybe a third. It's
We
just
get triggered. We get triggered all the time. The AI version of you doesn't get triggered.
Yeah, I love that what you said, JJ, about like having the built-in empathy, right? And there is a disconnect to the normal things that would trigger us, and as you said earlier, Amy, cause biases and judgments and things like that. I mean, it is all encompassing in terms of the friction it can reduce, right? So you're not creating things that are going to trigger others and provide things that give them things to push against, which makes everyone else more effective and gives you the opportunity to manage a broader group of people. I mean, when you say managing 15 people, my head spins because it's like, you can't do that effectively.
That's because everything is manual. But if you only exception handling and the rest of it is done by Deseri AI, very doable.
I like the ring of that.
Deseri AI. Ask a Des. That's Des and I do, we spend a lot of our time in each of our companies helping people manage conflict and drama. We teach a lot on the Cartman's drama triangle. And I think if people could be relieved of that, even in itself, like just not only would emotionally, they would be more okay because it's not being filtered through them. But I also think, problem solving would happen more efficiently because what managers often do is they create learned helplessness because they rescue and they don't really give good feedback. They just jump in and solve problems. And so people aren't really growing. They're just being rescued over and over again. And I think just to think of all of the problems that can solve, I think it's both intriguing and it's scary to humans too, because it's new, right? So I think all of that can be true at one time. As we kind of wrap up today, here's a question for you. So on behalf of the leaders who are listening, and majority of our listeners are leaders in some capacity, what are your recommendations just from here? Let's say whether they're like, I'm curious about how to integrate AI, or I want to do better at giving feedback. What are some takeaway suggestions that you might have for those leaders listening?
Yeah, so one of the issues right now is that every leader is like, what's my AI strategy and what's on my AI roadmap? And like, do we need to hire BCG to figure out sort of what our approach is? I think that's the wrong way of thinking about it. I think the right way of thinking about it is, what are 10 things in my business that can go better? And we have tried before and failed that AI can now solve differently, right? So the goal alignment, clarity, and feedback problem is a multi-decade long problem. It's not a new problem that we're solving. And we wouldn't have had a shot of solving it differently had it not been for applied AI. And those then become good use cases for thinking about how to use Gen AI or applied AI at work, which is you've tried in the past and it hasn't worked. And then there's a new toolkit here to solve it. But it should always start with, what problems do I solve to make my business start forward and move forward the right way? And that should always be where the investigation starts and where that goes. And then the second piece is, I would push people to dream and get uncomfortable, right? Because I think we're all creatures of habit. If you're running large organizations, you're more likely on the older side. That means you're likely to be hesitant to change. But like, I remember when computers came out and my parents' generation were like, what do I do with this thing, right? Like, it's the same all over again. And actually, if you study history, nothing will feel brand new. Which is why it blows my mind that everybody piled on NVIDIA thinking it's going to be the most sort of valuable thing on the planet, when if you studied the internet, the same thing happened with Cisco stock price, and then it crashed because the infrastructure layer gets commoditized over time. But people don't study history. And if you want to know how Gen AI played out and how many jobs got replaced and what new jobs got created, the internet of the last 30 years and the mobile phone of the last 15 years are very good proxies on how to think about it. And so if we live from fear or live from hesitation to change, I think that just hurts ourselves and everybody. But like, this is super exciting and it's fascinating. and we can sort of lead more with curiosity, and that is just better for everyone versus trying to protect fiefdoms that we have or protect ways we've done things before, or this is the way we've done it, so this is the way we'll always do it. And so just like extreme growth mindset will sort of propel leaders forward in this new world. And then the last thing is really think about what your superpowers are, right? And I've come down to that my ability to create unique insight on the fly is, I don't think AI will ever get good at it the way I am good at it. And I should look for opportunities where I get to use that superpower. And then I will find my highest and best use on a regular basis. And doing process engineering is probably not where I should be spending my time given who I am as a person.
I love that. I love thinking about, what is your superpower and leverage that, which I think can be interesting. Sometimes our superpower can also be our kryptonite.
Every overplayed strength is a weakness, and that is correct.
Yeah. Super helpful. I love your takeaways. And you've sparked a great question for me to ask a lot of my coaching clients. What are the 10 things that your business could be doing better? Making sure that you're staying in a place of uncomfortableness and learning and growing. And I think your concept, thought of, if you reflect back on how much change you have adapted and what has happened in our society, you've done it. And you can continue to leverage and do that going forward.
Absolutely. And the only two issues with AI, if we ever get to, there's a problem. A, if they invent a language and start talking to each other, we don't understand. And B, if they figure out a way for it to not be plugged out from the power circuit. So if they can power themselves and communicate without us knowing, there's a problem. If those two things don't happen, we're good.
Yeah, that's it. Somebody's writing a script about that, right?
Yeah, exactly.
In this moment.
What's the likelihood of that, JJ?
Yeah.
Oh my God.
That thought's going to keep me up at night. Thank you so much, JJ, for ending. No. Everybody unplug your computers before you go to bed tonight.
Yeah, we should always be able to switch it off, and that's important.
Yes.
In how we build that tech.
Amen. Yeah, lots of great takeaways. Thank you. Gosh, thank you, JJ, for jumping on, because we know that it is late at night for you and kind of, early mid-morning for us over here as we're doing this recording time. Thank you for sharing insights, wisdom. I think opening our minds for what's to come. I know that this is going to spur a lot of conversations for our listeners, so we're really grateful.
No, thank you for having me. This was a lot of fun.
Super fun. Thanks so much. Before we wrap up this episode with JJ, that was an awesome episode. Here are our 3 takeaways. The first one is this, and I love that JJ shared this. He said, I had the audacity to form a company. And he went on to say, looking around at who he was spending the most time with. And it made me think about, we're a sum total of the 5 people we spend the most time with. So when have taken the time to understand what your superpower is, surround yourself with folks like that, because that will be your inspiration, motivation to step into that superpower and your greatness.
Oh, good advice. Good advice. My, number 2 for me would be that all feedback that is good is direct and kind. And I think that whether or not we have technology to intercept this for us, if we just use that as our own feedback loop and our own lens of whenever we're going to share any kind of feedback, whether it is in the moment, whether we are doing some sort of performance evaluation, which Des and I are on the same page of, like, that shit shouldn't happen only once a year. People shouldn't know where they stand every 12 months with you. But whatever the feedback looks like, can you look at it through the lens of, is this direct and is it kind? And if not, how do I take out my own bias so that I can give that feedback? I think that's excellent advice from JJ.
I love that one too. The third is, I love how JJ simplified what management is. It's about creating space for people to perform, and what we can do as managers and as leaders are key. It's about observing what you're seeing and having conversations. And I love the simplicity in that because tying into what you said, Amy, around direct and kind. If we take those observations, have a conversation, we're going to then help that person to be more effective, which helps the team and helps the organization.
Thanks for listening to the Conscious Habit Podcast. If you dug this episode, we'd love it if you would subscribe, rate, and review this podcast. And if you're into this consciousness thing, if you like this conversation and you want to meet more like-minded people, head on over to Facebook and join the Conscious Habit community. Until next time, do the world a favor and go love yourself.